little last little tidbit. We had a few cats back in the day too.
Oh, yeah. Hey, everybody. Good afternoon. We are back for another episode of the Ship So series. Today is Thursday, August 3rd, 2023, and this is episode 29 in our yearly series. And as usual, we have a great show for you with amazing content and commentary. But this week, we're back with the FMR, the Freight Market Roundup, to catch you up on the emerging trends and the hottest information in supply chain today. And as my pleasure, and as always, it's my pleasure to introduce my co-host and my great friend Jason Brand. Jason, how are you, and what's happening in your world today?
I'm doing good. I am doing good. It is, sometimes I feel like we have to take a step back and just think about this because Anthony and me started doing this show back right at the peak of the pandemic when no one knew what was going on. Customers didn't know what was happening. Things were just a mess. Hence the ship show. The ship show. Say that 5 times fast. but, but really, what's amazed me is like we've left the pandemic era, but I mean, week over week, the amount of just titanic stuff that goes on is just in our realm is just unbelievable, and obviously we had the recent yellow situation or the developing, but we can almost call it recent now, yellow situation. But yeah, so yeah, it's been a busy week. Anthony, I know you've had a busy week. I know I've had a busy week. So let's dive into it. Let's give you guys the key takeaways, what's going on with our rates right now, so you can be a little bit more armed for the end of the week and going into next week. Sound good, Anthony?
Absolutely. But before we dive in, I just want to add one piece of information for our listeners is related to all things that have to do with U.S. customs and customs brokering. As many of supply chain is an integrated logistics solutions provider, and we're also an amazing U.S. customs broker. So we want to let you know that effective October 1st, 2023, there is going to be an increase in the U.S. customs and freight forwarding and customs brokering community. These are not SCS increases. So on October 1st, the customs merchandise processing fee, the minimum and the maximum, will increase. So customers will see a change on their invoices, and this is going to apply to any cargo arriving October 1st or later. So there's two standard fees that customs charges on every customs entry. That's the merchandise processing fee and the harbor maintenance fee. So only the MPF, the merchandise processing fee, is going to be going up, but it's for a specific class of entry. So for example, the usual merchandise processing fee, the ad valorem rate of 0.3464% will not change. Okay. But the MPF, the merchandise processing fee for minimum and maximum for formal entries for class codes 499 will change. And so the minimum will change from $29.66 to $31.67. And the maximum will change from $575.35 to $614.35. So they've capped it on the maximum. But I just thought it was important. We've sent out a blast. Our marketing team, Vanessa Fry and Dax, they do a great job with that. We've sent out a blast to all of our clients, but I just thought it was important right at the beginning of the ship show to let everybody know October 1st, look for that change in your MPF. Sorry for hogging up that time, Jay. Why don't you dive in and take us on a little ride and unpack what's going on?
Yeah, Anthony, that's the core goal of our show right there, making sure we're letting everyone know what's going on and what they're going to have to deal with, or where they can succeed. That's perfect. All right, guys, let me quick run through a visual agenda because we don't do any visuals on this show, just so you have an idea of how we're going to progress and how we're going to touch on categories. So this is our FMR, our Freight Market Roundup. And first thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about all of our major ocean trade lanes. So we're going to start with the Trans-Pacific. going to move our way over to the transatlantic. Finally, we're going to touch on the Suez Canal. So we're talking about China to Europe and also China to the Mediterranean. And between each of these sections, we're also going to touch on some current events our teams are thinking about or our customers are concerned about. And then after wrapping up, talking about really the ocean market and also with those current events, obviously we'll touch a little bit on the inland market as well. We're going to run through the rates we're seeing in the air freight market. And at the very end, we're going to touch on oil and gas. We added that in, obviously, right after the Ukraine war. Fuel surcharges started going crazy, and we needed to kind of keep our finger on the pulse of that. But we've kept that going. I think it makes a lot of sense. And also, just actually beginning earlier in this year, we were seeing people still paying these old, ridiculously high fuel surcharges. So it's been a great reminder for everyone. But let's get going. Let's dive right into our China to US West Coast lane. So, quick reminder, we're focused on the ocean portion. We're not talking about the inland portion when we're talking about these rates. So that means, if you are shipping door to door, or if you're shipping FOB, you're going to see a more expensive rate that you're getting. So check your invoice, make sure you find the line item detailing that ocean portion for a better comparison about, where the market is, what we're paying, what you're paying, things like that. Now, if you can't find that, you probably got to find yourself a different provider because there's probably charges baked in all over the place. But I'm digressing. Let's move back to this rate. So we just had a GRI push through. That means right now our rates are higher than they were, that general rate increase. So right now we're seeing rates into the US West Coast from Southeast Asia or China landing at right about $1,500. The real question is this going to stick or is this going to go away? Like the past GRIs have been pushed through, have kind of washed away pretty quickly. So only time will tell on that one, but we are definitely expecting it to be washed away like the rest have been. A little good segue kind of from that into the market and why we think that's going to be washed away is just if you look at warehouses and distribution centers, and if you specifically look at Southern California. So there's a little bit of data that came out of a place called Inland Empire. It's about 60 miles away from Los Angeles, and they had their vacancy rate in their facilities was 3.4% in the second quarter. Now, it was lower than the national average of 4.1%, but it was up from the 1.9% vacancy rate that we saw in the beginning of this year. So that's something to kind of keep in mind. Those vacancy rates are increasing right now. And there's another key factor that's kind of showing that things are not as challenging to move through the West Coast ports as they used to be. And this isn't your conventional dwell times, but if you look at specifically dwell times for boxes leaving these terminals by truck, generally speaking, that means they're going to warehouses that are relatively close. It used to be, if we go all the way back to June 2022, it was 5.5 days. And in June 2021, remember, March was when the shutdown happened. That was about 4.8 days. And remember, this is boxes leaving the terminals by truck. If we go back to the beginning of this year, the dwell time for that was only 2.9 days. And that still sounds like a lot, doesn't sound like a big difference, but really it said that if you're under 3 days for that dwell time, things are operating the way they should be. So it's right on that line, but it's in the area where it's considered operating as normal. Yeah. Now let's switch gears though real quick, because even though the ILWU in the US found itself to start agreeing, we still had that kind of line as we would say, of the ILWU Canada having issues. And, the good news is it looks like we're seeing some positive responses finally to this. So cargo handling that was going through the Western Canadian ports of Vancouver and also of Prince Rupert was actually considered normal. And that was last Monday. And so what we're seeing here, though, is it was normal after they had reached another tentative contract. Now, as a reminder, there was a previous contract which was denied. So this is another one coming through. And really the hopes of this, tentative contract moving forward are on the rank and file of that, ILWU Canada. And, seeing that they did reject the last one, there still is rejection kind of on the table, but things are looking better, especially given after that massive strike we had to deal with. Things have been operating normally. Anthony.
Now, Jay, just real quick, I want to digress if that's okay, because you hit on something earlier that's really important. And before I go into that, you're talking about the ILWU and the contract. Let's just let our listeners know that the Port of Los Angeles is closed today, August 3rd. So even though they agreed to this tentative contract, members of the ILWU are meeting today to discuss the status of the contract. So we don't know what that means, except they're having a discussion, even though there was a tentative agreement, okay, an agreement. We just have to see, what happens as we move in the next week. But there's a couple other things when Jason was talking about the pricing for the Trans-Pacific freight. And I kind of want to let everybody know that, on July 15th, the cartel of carriers tried to implement a GRI. So it came in at one quantum level. And then, as Jason said, it didn't last too long. It didn't stick. And, if they tried to increase it, like put a GRI in for $400, it might have got pulled back to 200. Things are changing now, though. And on August 1st, the carriers imposed a general rate increase between $400 to $650 per FEU, which is a 40-foot equipment unit, okay, a 40-foot container or high cube. Now, considering the space situation, we suggest clients release bookings earlier to us for better arrangement and space coverage. Because believe it or not, the space is getting tight right now in the Trans-Pacific trade lane. And this is a continuing trend that we will continue. I'm sorry to use that word so many times, but it's going to continue to trend this way as we move into the new year. If you look at some of the news headlines and you just have your finger on the pulse like Jay and I and all of our other associates at SCS do, carriers are just letting everyone know that they are losing money right now. So they continue to mothball entire fleets, pulling out capacity out of the global rotation in order to reduce access to capacity to drive up the rates. So the current space is very, very tight, and carriers are looking to book higher revenue freight regardless of the contracts, what your contracts say. For example, we might have a contract for 5,000 FEU on one container ship line. And even though we have allotments and some preferential rate, if someone comes in on the spot market and is willing to pay a higher rate than what's in our contract, the carriers are booking this higher revenue freight. And we're already hearing that they're going to implement another general rate increase on August 15th. And I think the industry is going to start to see, unless, we have a catastrophic economic collapse, we're going to see GRIs attempt to be implemented from now as we move into the fall and through to Chinese New Year. So I know it sounds, I don't want to say far-fetched, but this is a phenomenon that's happening right now, and that we really have to keep our fingers on the pulse on this. So don't be shocked when you see higher rates. This is what the carriers are doing. And then on one last note, anecdotally, we got some great communications from a couple of our partners in the Asia Pacific Rim just this morning. And we want to let everyone know that Typhoon Kana is centered west of Okinawa. So the storm is really forecasted to gradually move westward toward the northwest into the eastern China Seas today on October 3rd. So there is the potential, depending on what happens with this typhoon, that it's going to impact port operations. So I would just say to everyone, check with your account representative at SCS, reach out to Jason and I for real-time updates, because it could delay a vessel, it could delay a sailing, it could delay port operations. But I didn't mean to suck up all the time here, Jay. I just wanted to say this phenomenon about the GRIs is something that's not going to go away.
I think it's a really good topic too, because that was it July 15th or July 14th? What was that GRI again?
Well, August 1st, and then we just had one, 2 days ago. And then, of course, the next GRI that will be attempted is on August 15th.
Well, the last one though was a not the August 1st one, but the one in July was like an $1,000 GRI. It was like record breaking from what we had seen previously. I mean, I
Yes.
remember when we were talking about that, we were like, what in the world are they expecting is going to happen with this?
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and that's, and you see it through our averages. It's stuck like $100 of it. And, obviously that we've got this rapid GRI approach happening, but what's unfortunate, and you touched on it beautifully, is even in the contract season of this last year, we had shippers who were okay signing contracts for more than the spot market because they were kind of saying, look, we understand these rates aren't going to last through peak season. We need to sign a rate where we can ship at this rate and you'll be comfortable honoring that rate when we hit peak season, right? So you saw the contracted rates being actually higher than the spot market. But now you're seeing again a situation where a lot of capacity has been removed, but then spot market is superseding these contracted rates. And it's really, really tough. And
Yeah.
I think what's unfortunate about it is during the pandemic, I think there was plenty of excuses about why that was happening, right? But now we're on the flip side, at the total other end of the spectrum, and it's still happening. It's a bad look for contracting with carriers. It really, really is. And it's unfortunate, quite frankly. And it might be actually, a means to changing how things operate going forward once we hit normalcy. But we'll see how that goes. And, shippers will be able to vote based on how they operate their business. And so if they choose to try to avoid working with these ocean carriers and bringing their suppliers closer, that may be the result. This could be a short-term gain and long-term pain for the carriers.
Yeah.
But we'll see.
Go ahead, Jay.
Yeah, no worries. Let me dive into transatlantic. So transatlantic wise is looking pretty. I don't like having a doom and gloom, but it's looking pretty grim. And this actually builds off of a few different factors. But there was a funny quote in one of the articles that basically said the party's over on the US East Coast. And it's coming from an industry executive saying that, and also Anthony and me talking about this all the time. I mean, we totally get what he's talking about. Every other rate dived, and the US East Coast was just up there, still multitudes higher than the rest. And right now, I mean, we have seen the biggest sink in our Europe to our US East Coast rates that we haven't seen a sink in this level for quite some time. So for an example, right now, averages were around 1,500 a TEU. And just as an example, we really thought the floor was at 2,100. And it was sitting at 2,100 for months, a TEU, 20-foot equivalent unit. And now it's 1,500, and we're expecting it to drop. Some estimates are saying it's going to go under 1,000 a TEU, which is just completely insane because that's below pre-pandemic levels. Now, Anthony touched on a couple things and talking about the West Coast, and we're having similar issues on the East Coast because we have all these port labor negotiations and they're not buttoned up. So we've got our US ILWU that's meeting. We've got the Canadian ILWU that's having their own meetings that are happening this week, Thursday, Friday, and they need to have this either ratified, this newest tentative agreement. And then you've got your East Coast that's going through, it's actually we're learning more about these negotiations that we did, which is great, but they're going through plenty of bumps in the road and very unique bumps actually at that. So,
And Jay, real quick, just one thing, and then you can go on to your next thing. So just to give you perspective, I was doing some research last night for one of our clients, some historical data gathering, and folks, not to shock anyone, this time, well, let's say last year, in January of last year, for rates going in to LA, containers were going for 16,000, okay, for a 40 or a high cube, okay, into New York, okay, say you were shipping from Haiphong, Vietnam to New York, containers were going for 24,000. So I just wanted to say, when I read that again last night, I was like, wow, how far has the market dropped to where we're at now that you were just talking about, Jay?
Oh yeah,
So
yeah. But it's like it's so funny because it's even hard to compare pre-pandemic rates to now because there's just been so much investment in these ports. They have bigger bills now. I mean, and having the same rate is not it's not even covering their costs. And so that's where it's like if we're seeing pre-pandemic rates, that is the time, if you need to ship or you're waiting for some reason to ship then because they will go up as soon as things normalize. But yeah, so East Coast, we've got these talks are happening a little bit differently. So generally speaking, there is when the port authorities and the union authorities meet, they generally come up with a master agreement, and then that gets agreed upon, and then it trickles down to the local areas where they kind of work out what they need locally. What's happening on the East Coast is very different. So the union leadership essentially said, okay, what we want you to do, and they said this back in September of last year, is figure out what's going on locally and hammer in those agreements, and then we'll work our way up to the master agreement. It's totally different. They normally do not do this. And so basically there was this big statement that came out from this guy, Dennis Deget, who's the executive vice president, and apologies, I might have slaughtered his last name a little bit, but he had a speech last week, Tuesday, and he basically said that, the reason why they flipped this around is that the local management doesn't bargain in good faith, and they hide behind these no strike clauses that come with these master agreements. And so they want to start at the bottom and work their way up. Now, it has been a little ugly, and there's already been a turn down of one of the contracts that was offered, which happened back in March. And it's, I really, there is obviously always in sight, but it's at this point, it doesn't really feel like it's in sight. So, Anthony, this is kind of in your territory. What are you feeling about all this?
Oh, it's a real hot mess. I got to be honest with you. I mean, I really think we're just going to have to see how this plays out, Jason. I don't think it's one of those things where, we could predict what's going to happen,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I totally get that. There is a unique issue here. So some of the East Coast ports, when they did their expansion plans, they specifically wrote into the contracts and they worked with the local governments that said this is going to be hybrid working. This is going to be not 100% union working. And that is on the negotiation table. There's a couple lawsuits going on from the ILA to these port authorities trying to claim that this is unfair. And that's going to be a huge sticking point because there are contracts set in place, agreed upon, saying you can be a hybrid facility. And the part of this negotiation seems to be trying to overturn those contracts. And I can just imagine that is going to be a tooth and nail fight.
Yeah, the unions are going to take such a hard line on this. We all know that, okay? Yeah. And I mean, they're so intimidated by the fact that not only do they want to automate the processes on the terminal to make them more efficient and modernize it. I mean, even though the port terminals around our country have very good infrastructure, there are some terminals that are outdated and need investment, and their methodology in terms of how they operate is, they're still operating like they're back in the 70s. Mm-hmm. And, the union's going to take a hard line about hybrid working schedules, about, protecting the union members. And I get all that, but it's a really flashpoint kind of a thing where if they pour the wrong, gas on this, it could just blow up, just my perspective, Jack.
And like this all kind of leads up to the timing where the U.S. West Coast trade negotiations were happening at a really good time when it comes to power for the union in that negotiation. We had extremely high rates. We had a ton of congestion. A strike was a really serious threat. You flip over to the U.S. East Coast right now, and all of these wage negotiations and such are coming at a time when our transatlantic trade lanes are at their lowest point. It's really a challenging time for them to be going through this negotiation. So, for example, NSC, they're the largest carrier by market share on the transatlantic. Currently, their market share is at 37.9%, but that's actually down from 42.3%, which is due to them actually just shutting down routes altogether. So back in May, they shut down, for example, their Boston Express service, which was in North Europe to Boston. And it was 2 loops as well. And then they also shut down Italy service, and also an East Mediterranean service. And then on top of that, Maersk also, they used to have a a market share of around 14%, 15% in the transatlantic, specifically US East Coast. And now they're down to 9% because they removed capacity from Europe as well. So, we're seeing carriers kind of pulling out of the US East Coast because of this lack of demand. And you also see this just in the import numbers. So, for example, if you look at U.S. imports from North Europe, they've seen monthly declines since January. And so, as example, May and June both had a reported 17% drop in year-over-year volumes. And then also, if you look at imports from the Mediterranean, that's even worse, with them falling as far as 21% and 24% for May and June. So it's volume is definitely down on the U.S. East Coast. And I think with these negotiations, it's decent news for the West Coast because that, just like we saw with the West Coast moving to the East Coast during those negotiations, the same thing is happening. But still, there's less cookies in the jar, so to speak. So it's, the shuffle isn't as intense and it's not causing congestion. Couple things, Anthony, I want to talk a little bit about what's going on with the LTL market. Do you have anything you want to throw in there before I dive in?
Well, I appreciate you giving me a second here to just add my essence, which is great. It's a real mess with this whole thing with yellow freight right now, everyone. As you know, the reason they went bankrupt is because they could not make the $50 million payment into the Teamsters pension fund. And as Jason and I mentioned last week, we're already starting to see a strain on the LTL market with all the other carriers trying to absorb the capacity. And as we mentioned last week, I think we're going to continue to see a lot of volatility in the LTL market, and they're predicting rates are going to go up anywhere from 9 to 12% as we go into the fall and into the new year. So, it's a very sad situation. Over 30,000 employees laid off. But I know you've got some great information that you sent out earlier today, Jay. Why don't you tell us about some of that in terms of some of their assets and how that's all going as well?
Yeah, it's a crazy situation because by revenue, Yellow was the 3rd largest LTL carrier. And so if you just imagine them with, when they started the year, they had 356 terminals. And then by when they started falling apart, they were down to 301 terminals. But still, that's a lot. That is a lot of space that's just being deleted right now from the LTL marketplace. So just like Anthony said, you can expect the LTL market prices to go up. You're definitely going to expect some tightening. And, we already saw this during the pandemic when, we had this surplus of freight going on. FedEx, for example, they were shedding customers because they didn't want to deal with the hard to deal with, or, if you've got a bad location or you have bad freight, they didn't want your business. And now we're going to probably be back in that same situation when you take this much capacity out. Now, a couple things are going on, though. And while there is going to be a tightening of the market, the vultures are swarming. There are, for example, Estes Express. They're the 5th largest by revenue. They opened a 76-door terminal earlier this month in New Orleans. It's 32,000 square feet of dock space. XPO, they're the 4th largest LTL carrier by revenue. They added a 46-door terminal in Georgia earlier this month as well. And also, we've got Averitt. It's a Southern regional LTL carrier. They're based out of Tennessee. They added 35,000 square feet of warehousing space to their existing terminal in South Carolina. You've got R&L Carriers. They're the 8th largest LTL carrier by revenue. They opened an 180-door terminal in Florida earlier this year and another 150-door terminal in Indiana. So you're seeing the other LTL carriers soaking up space to be able to prepare for more capacity coming in. And what's, I think, crazy about this is, so far this year, truckload and LTL has not been doing great. And so them buying all of them, well, leasing all of this space is it's an interesting move. And obviously with the collapse of Yellow, it's going to be utilized. But if you did notice through that list, a lot of that East Coast capacity, there is a little bit of Southern California capacity that's coming online, but it's very, very East Coast. And what's funny is generally when we talk about domestic shipping and generally when we talk about, the truckload and less than truckload market, we kind of think of the truckload and LTL markets kind of acting a little bit in sync. But in so far this year, it's actually not been the case. So LTL has, even despite what's gone on with Yellow and before Yellow's really full demise, has kind of separated itself from the truckload market. If you look at the PPI, you can really see this story. So the PPI, the Producer Price Index for long distance LTL, if you look between May and June, it dropped by 1%. But if you compare that to the long haul truckload PPI in the same period, we saw that drop by 4.3%. Now that was May to June. Obviously now we're in August. This is on the heels of Yellow falling apart. You're going to see that 1% drop turn into, just as Anthony said, likely as high as a 9% increase. Well, at least if you flip the equation to go over to costs, but it's going to be very, very interesting in the LTL market. Also a fantastic time to consider optimization because you do have this divergence of your LTL and your truckload markets, and that is opportunity. So, Anthony, anything else to add before I quick touch on China to Europe?
Yeah, well, just real quick, don't forget, folks, as we said last week, Jason and I, Supply Chain Solutions has, allotments. We have made some tweaks to our methodology and our suite of carriers. So we're in a position to absorb any of your LTL freight. If you weren't using us, you got to come over because Bob Lally, Sarah Stark, our domestic team, simply the best. They do a tremendous job. It's a well-oiled machine, and we are ready to take all of your freight and give you the hand-holding that you really deserve. Jason, back to you. I don't want to.
Oh, no. That's
suck up all the airtime.
So I want to just talk about our Suez Canal, our Southeast Asia, China to Europe lane. And I'm just going to say it pretty blatantly. This lane has actually been steady. It's been extremely steady. It has been the steadiest lane. So we saw a ton of rockiness when it was the end of the year last year through after Chinese New Year of this lane. The most rockiness Anthony and I had seen throughout the pandemic. This has been kind of old faithful, a great barometer for where international shipping is. And it's kind of back to that point. So over the past, we're looking at almost 5 months now, this lane's cost has been between $1,150 and $1,400, and it hasn't deviated out of that range for us. So right now, if you're a customer of ours, you're likely paying $1,250, or there could be a slight deviation between that, but it's been basically the steadiest lane out of all the major shipping lanes throughout the world. But that being so low in cost, and also we used to discuss a little bit of this inversion where shipments not going all the way to Europe were shipments not going all the way to Europe on this lane were more expensive than shipments going all the way to Europe. It's not great news. It's more of a indication of just what we've been discussing, just low demand. But it will change. Demand always will change. We hit a low point and then it ultimately builds to a high point again. And it's an alternation. And because of the pandemic, obviously we superheated that process. So we're seeing higher highs and lower lows. Now, quick one to discuss the air freight market. There was some big news that came out from Pratt & Whitney. They announced a massive recall on their, it's their PW 1100G engines, but they're best known for retrofitted on the Airbus 320, a very, very popular plane. So there's going to be about 200 of them pulled. And that's happening pretty quick by mid-September. And they've got plans to pull another 1,000 over the next 9 to 12 months. So be prepared for a little bit of squeeze in capacity when it comes to air freight. It is a popular plane. It's a versatile plane. You can retrofit it for a couple different ways. So not great. And this kind of recall has tanked companies before, but it sounds like they've got it under control somehow. We'll keep you updated if anything changes on that. But and even if they don't have it under control, that the situation isn't affecting the newest models. It goes all the way up to 2021, 2014 to 2021 models. So unfortunately, it did hit some of the, when carriers were beefing up their fleets, but not the latest models. So that's good. Switching over to our Southeast Asia and China to the US air freight. Right now, we're seeing $4.75 a kilogram, and that's our average, with a low coming in at $4.15 a kilogram. European partners, our average coming out of Europe right now is around $135 a kilogram. Now, that's actually a lot higher than we were seeing over the past month. We saw lows in the $180 a kilogram, but that was extremely low for this lane. 235 is actually just in line with what it normally is. So, it does not make it a bad time to ship. It just at that $1.80-ish point, that was crazy low. So yeah, keep that in mind. Now, there is a little bit of more grim news, unfortunately. I'm sorry, but it's just involving they're not having a great forecast right now. So DHL came out, and essentially their forwarding business unit decreased by 40.3% in revenue on their first half of the year. That's painful. And then their air freight volume fell by 15.9% in the first half of the year. And a lot of the loss of volume was felt primarily on the lanes we just discussed, China to US and Europe to US. So keep that in mind. And then the oil and gas markets, there is actually a big uptick we saw. So diesel prices, we saw the largest uptick we've seen in months. Went up by 22 cents in 1 week. Now our averages are at 4.12. But again, just like what I mentioned for the European to US air freight markets, this is not expensive. This is actually more of a correction, and it should be viewed as a good thing. If these prices kept going down and down and down, it's not good. So the 412 still very reasonable in cost. Remember, this is the average across the US. It was a 22-cent increase. We'll keep our eyes on this, make sure it's not spiking, but for now, it's okay. Anthony, any final notes before we close up the show for today?
Yeah, just one thing. I wanted to let everyone know that I forgot to mention this earlier, that with respect to the Panama Canal, it's experiencing its worst drought since 2019, when they had the last big drought. So right now, the canal is limited to only 32 vessels a day transiting the Panama Canal, which could really cause a major impact for the global shipping industry, for all those container ships and bulk carriers and, oil tankers and different types of vessels going through the canal. So it hasn't been seen since 2019, and they're talking about implementing a Panama Canal surcharge later in August. So again, as much as I hate to say it, there's another, specter of another increase out there. So it's something we have to watch. Everyone's got to remember Panama Canal was a series of lakes. Army Corps of Engineers went in there, and I had the opportunity to go to Panama in April this year for a conference and got to see it up close. It's an amazing feat of engineering, but water levels were dangerously low back in April, and it's still going on. So stay tuned to the show, because Jason and I will keep our finger in the pulse of that to let you know when that increase does go into effect. I think it's imminent. Okay. I think that's it for me today, Jay. It was a great one today. We touched on a lot of different things. What do you want to do?
All over the place.
We're sprinkling it now. What do you have on tap for next week?
Next week, we've got a couple things going on, but we'll release that via email, because once we get the details of what we want to focus on, we want to let you know. But make sure you tune in next week, Thursday. It is going to be a great one. So yeah.
I guess we'll just say it. Jason and I want everyone to know, make it a great day. And thank you for joining.
Thanks, Anthony. I had to let you close it. I couldn't step on your toes.
Stop. Take care, everyone.
See you, everybody.
All the best.